Hello, and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we take a look at the case of a drunken man who was kicked out of a nightclub, and because he was upset about what had happened, he squirted petrol at two random doormen whilst holding a naked flame. The bouncers had asked Joseph Gibson to leave the city centre bar that he was partying in, which was called Bar 54, in Liverpool in the early hours of the morning. Mr. Gibson, who was 30 years old, had walked all the way to the BP garage in Toxteth, where he filled up a plastic bottle with petrol. Once he had got the bottle of petrol, he then headed up to Matthew Street, where an irrational confrontation had begun with two doormen who were unconnected to the earlier incident which had unfolded. The judge, Stuart Driver QC, described Mr. Gibson as a danger to the public after watching the CCTV footage of his very troubling behaviour. However, the Crown Prosecution Service offered no evidence on these charges when he was at court. This resulted in Mr. Gibson receiving not guilty verdicts after he admitted the lesser offence of an affray. Liverpool Crown Court heard how Mr. Gibson left Club 54 on Steel Street and headed to the garage on Sefton Street shortly after midnight on Monday the 21st of June. Christopher Hopkins, prosecuting, said he purchased some petrol, which somehow he managed to put into a small bottle, essentially a drinks bottle. The court was told how Mr. Gibson then went on to North John Street, where he stood on the corner of Matthew Street at around 1:15 AM. A concerned member of the public spoke to two doormen, James Murphy and David Alderson, who went to speak to Mr. Gibson. Mr. Hopkins, who was prosecuting, said, "The defendant was seen on CCTV. He's got a lighter in one hand, which he's flicking and igniting, and the bottle held in the other." Mr. Gibson then approaches the two doormen and squirts the liquid, the petrol, from the bottle towards them. One of them reacts as if he's caught him in the face. The court heard how Mr. Gibson also appeared to squirt some petrol on the ground by a car when he could be seen to kneel down as if he was attempting to light it. Mr. Hopkins said, "It falls short of attempting to do the act, but it is threatening them with petrol and with a lighter in his hand." Judge Stuart Driver QC said this was in a different part of the city centre than the nightclub he was thrown out of. Mr. Hopkins replied, "That's right, it has nothing to do with these two men, so he hasn't returned to the scene, as it were. In that sense, it's unusual, sort of an irrational type of behaviour." The court heard how the police had arrived and restrained Mr. Gibson on the ground and recovered the bottle. Mr. Gibson of Gresham Street, Fairfield, has 26 previous convictions for 54 offences, including assaults, drug dealing, drug possession, criminal damage and threatening behaviour. Mr. Hopkins said he received a lengthy prison sentence for drug dealing in 2013, and in March of 2019 he was convicted of 2 assaults on police officers. Mr. Hopkins also said that Mr. Murphy and Mr. Alderson didn't want to make police or victim statements. However, he said, it was a high culpability case because there was an intention to cause fear and very serious violence. Judge Driver agreed with this and said there were 2 troubling features to the case. He said, although Mr. Gibson was drunk, it was a planned attack. He had had a dispute with some doormen, walked some distance, brought a bottle, filled it with petrol, and took it back and confronted some other doormen. The second is how dangerous it was. I imagine the prosecution would say the potential for grave harm was most definitely there. Mr. Hopkins said, of course, he could have easily set them on fire. Judge Driver added, or he could have damaged the car that was very nearby. Ken Heckle, who was defending Mr. Gibson, said he is very remorseful and accepted how serious it was, but he disputed that he had confronted the doorman. Mr. Heckle said he's confronted by people, and then there is a confrontation. He hasn't made the first move in North John Street, so to speak. Judge Driver, however, interjected. Well, he has made the first move. He has gone and filled a bottle up with petrol. Mr. Heckle said his client hadn't sought anybody out deliberately. Mr. Heckle said, while it isn't an excuse, Mr. Gibson has told me that he doesn't understand how he was able to fill the bottle. Mr. Heckle went on to explain, the defendant doesn't really know what his intentions were, other than he was in a dark place and had far too much to drink. Mr. Heckle explained that Mr. Gibson's mum had died in March last year, and from then he went on a downward spiral of drink and drugs. Mr. Heckle said that Mr. Gibson had declined bereavement counselling because he didn't like talking to strangers, and for the same reason didn't necessarily want professional help for drug taking, although he had quit alcohol. He said he can't perceive what will be in his life instead of the cannabis to assist him. Mr. Heckle said that Mr. Gibson was prescribed medication for anxiety and depression. He urged the judge to spare him jail so he could receive support in the community. Judge Driver told Mr. Gibson that there were 3 bad, aggravating features: the planning, the danger, and his criminal record. The judge said, you had a dispute with some doormen in the city centre. Although you were drunk, you walked to the petrol station, bought a bottle of drink, emptied it and filled it with petrol, which you then took back to the city centre and confronted 2 different doormen. You had in your hand a naked flame whilst you squirted petrol on 2 men, and next to a vehicle in which the driver was sitting. Because of all these factors, Judge Driver decided to jail Mr. Gibson for 12 months, telling Mr. Gibson, the sentence cannot be suspended because you are a danger to the public. The pre-sentence report concludes that you represent a high risk of serious harm to members of the public, though thankfully only a few of them were present. What are your opinions on the crimes committed by Mr. Gibson? Do you believe 12 months was the right sentence to give him? Or do you believe he should have got much longer? What are your opinions on Mr. Gibson asking for a community sentence? Do you think the judge should have granted him a community sentence? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed the content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and you want to see more Street Crime UK content, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, stay safe.